In today's tutorial, I'm making a custom or personalized watercolor floral note card, and I'm using a technique that I love to use, which is taking some blue painter's tape and cutting it in a certain shape. This is a rhombus, I think is what this is. Let me know in the comments if it's not a rhombus, if it's called something else. But anyway, I have two different angled corners on here, and I'm just going to eyeball it and stick it in the center of my 4x6 watercolor note card that I have pre-cut. And this will create a white space so that when I paint on or around this tape, I can peel the tape off later and do something else in that space. And if you watch until the end, you'll find that I changed my mind in the process. So I love creating these tutorials and letting you see my mistakes or see where I didn't like the outcome of what I make and how I fix it so that the project isn't wasted and I can continue on to finish the project. So I'm starting with some dark blue peonies. I've decided it's August 1st and I'm starting to feel more and more like fall, even though it's probably 90 degrees outside. I'm really digging the fall florals that are out in the shops, and I'm enjoying the more moody, darker tones these days. So I'll be working on some fall hand embroidered hats soon, and I'm really loving different fall colors, blues and oranges and browns. So these peonies are just being painted with a round brush, and I'm using kind of a swoopy backward C or upside down C stroke on most of these petals, just playing around with where I might like to place them. I kind of start small in the center and work my way out. This will be the base layer. After this layer dries, I'll go back in with some darker blue just to give some more definition. I'm touching the blue tape here so that when I peel that off, it kind of leaves that white space, which makes it kind of pop and it looks cool. And I don't have a complete game plan. When I began this little project, I knew I wanted some blue peonies and some orange kind of 4-petal flowers. But beyond that, I did not have a plan. I did not sketch this out. This is just painting with what's in my heart at the time. And I'm filling the space by eye. So I like to make things feel organic and natural. And to do that, it helps me to just start painting florals. And I add in as I go. I start with the larger flowers and I place them. Typically, I like to do 3, 5, or 7 of each flower. So you'll see here, I'm not painting the entire flower. I'm kind of painting where it would blend in with the space of the tape. It's kind of peeking out at the top there. And don't forget, you can always turn your cards. Sometimes I forget and I find myself in an awkward hand position and it starts to hurt, and I think to myself, oh goodness, I can just turn the paper. So don't forget, you can turn your paper. I'm painting a whole flower here just to have a little bit of contrast between this one and the one that is peeking out on top of that blue strip there. But what you're going to do is you're just going to fill in your white space. Yours can look completely different than mine. You might want to use pastel colors or a different set, maybe all oranges and browns for fall, maybe a little burgundy in there. That's entirely up to you. This is just showing a technique of adding florals to this blue tape technique, which you will see at the end is where I customize this card. I'm getting ready to travel and I wanted to give a little thank you note to the friend that I'm staying with. So I'm painting this and I plan on putting her name where that blue tape is. And my first attempt I didn't like, which is coming up, you'll see towards the end here, but I actually liked better my second attempt than originally what was in my head. So I'm adding in a dark blue layer here on this peony just to give it a little bit more depth and texture. When I originally used my base color for this blue, I did add a little bit of black. So if you like a color but you want it to be darker, you can try adding black, gray, or brown. I've had luck with those. So another thing you can do is just add another layer of the same color on top and let it dry and see how you like it. Again, if there's some petals that aren't as roundish as I like, I'll just kind of go over them with a darker color until I get the shaping that I like. Feel free to have a practice paper next to you where you can use that here and there to test these out. When I go to add the berries on, if you haven't painted berries before, you definitely want to test paper. So you can see I just added one here below because I'm thinking ahead of some things that I might be doing and wondering if I'm going to need that test paper. So it's a good idea to have that handy nearby so that you can test out some different colors and color combinations. This orange I think goes really well with this blue. I mixed in a little bit of brown with my orange from my palette there just to give it a little bit of a darker hue, and I really like how it's turning out. I enjoy painting off the paper. That's why I have this cardboard piece underneath my card is actually the backing to the watercolor paper that I buy. I save them. I have probably, 12 to 20 of them. My watercolor paper comes in sheets of 50, and this cardboard is very thick and it's on the back. And I like using it for those times when I paint off of the paper so it doesn't get on my table or stain anything that I have below. So I reuse them after they dry. I just keep using them over and over again until they get too much paint on them, and then it's kind of a distraction, and then I'll recycle them because it is cardboard. So you'll see I painted a little orange flower on the corner, a couple going off to the sides. They do have 4 petals, but since they do go off the paper, I'm only showing half of them here and there. Now for these other white spaces, I thought originally I would do small flowers to fill that white space, kind of like a filler flower, but I decided that I wanted to incorporate some more brown for fall, and I like the idea of branches. And at this point I wasn't quite sure if I would leave them as branches or put flowers on them or exactly what I would do, but that's the great thing about just painting in the moment with no maybe clear direction or exact thing that you want to do. This is what makes it enjoyable for me, is to make these creative decisions as I go. But probably about right now I'm deciding that I like the idea of adding berries to these little branches. And as I'm looking at this, I originally thought maybe a burgundy or maybe more of that orange, only darker, or maybe even some sort of brown or green, but I landed on wanting more blue. And I just counted these and realized that I wanted another one in this set because I had an even number and I do like odd numbers. So I'm adding one more, and then I'm going to mix a dark blue for almost like a blueberry shape. So I'm adding black to my blue and testing it out. If it's a little too black, I add a little bit more blue and keep testing until I get just kind of a rich, dark blue. And again, on the berries, make sure you do a tester strip full of practice. These, I just go super, super slow. And remember, you can always start small and get bigger, but it's super difficult to get big and go smaller. So I'm doing a berry on each of these little branches, leaving a white spot or speck just to show a little bit of reflection. And I like to do these in sets of 3s. Sometimes I'll add more, sometimes less. If I'm painting these little berries in a spot that has a lot of color or over something in the background, such as one of these petals, I'll just be sure that when I fill it in, like on this one, I leave the white spot on the white paper instead of on the little spot on where the flower is, because then the peachy orange would show through and it wouldn't be as vibrant. So I'm just kind of letting each little section dry before I add another one, and then I'm grouping that third berry in, leaving a little white speck, starting pretty small, making sure I have a lot of pigment on my paintbrush so that these remain dark. I want these to dry dark and kind of pop off the paper. You can tell I can get a little bit of the stark blue and some of the peonies here and there, but I like the consistency of keeping these little blueberries or whatever kind of berry they are super dark. So I'm just going to go in and fill in all of these branches, and I'm just taking my time. This process is so relaxing for me. Once you get the hang of these circles, it just becomes a little bit repetitive, but I like repetition. Repetition kind of soothes me, and it just takes my mind into a quiet space, and it's kind of meditative for me, I suppose. So I really enjoy creating these over and over again to fill this space to make it look super nice. And if you decide you want to add a few more in, you have the freedom to do that. If you can see in the upper right there, I have 5 little berries kind of together. I think that makes it look even more natural and organic, that they all aren't exactly the same. And you can use, this would be super cute with the orange berries or adding another color in. This is where you get to be creative and make your artist choices and make all those decisions for yourself, which can be fun. So next, I'm trying to figure out if I wanted to add some brown specks here and there on the white section, but I decided to go ahead and just fill in the orange flowers here just to give them a center. And I'm just dabbing into my brown paint and then kind of in the center there at random. This is not perfection right here. This is very organic, and just adding a little bit of dimension. And then I'm going to work on the petals and just pull down some orange in towards those center. Now you can touch the brown, it's wet, and it'll kind of bleed and blend together, which is a nice look. I decided to try not to touch the brown. I think here and there I may have a little bit, but again, that's entirely up to you. Watercolor dries lighter generally, so just keep that in mind. You might have to do this once or twice more. I left it as it was because I liked it, and I just kind of hit each of the petals to add the extra texture in here and there. Now it's time for leaves, and I don't know if you can see in my pan, but I ran out of olive, so I'm adding some in here from my large tube. Now this tube is a large from, I think it was Master's Touch from Hobby Lobby, and these were great. They were $7 and they were huge, but they don't carry them anymore. They only have smaller tubes now that are, I think they're like $3.99 or $4.99, but I just fill my pans with tube paint and I let it dry. And I didn't add water to this because my tube paint was pretty wet already, and I kind of liked how it came across on the paper, so I just went with it and left it. I thought it was really pretty. So I'm just adding green leaves here. Some are attached to flowers, some just come right off of that blue tape. I just kind of eyeball this. The peony flowers, I just used just a typical leaf here, and I'll add some stems, but I prefer more impressionism with my paintings, and also with my embroidery actually. So they're not exact representations of any flower. Some people think these look more like roses. I think that's fine. Some people think they look like peonies. Peony is what I'm going for, but it's just a representation of a flower. The 4-petal orange flower, I'm not sure what kind of flower I would call that even. I just love the shapes of them. So I kind of do the same thing with my leaves. They're not always exactly probably the proper shape of an exact peony flower. A lot of times peonies have those little kind of little tiny leaves that are above the stem, and I didn't really add those on here unless the leaves that I did add kind of look like that, I suppose. But you're the artist, so you get to make those decisions and fill in and make things look nice as you go. So I'm going to take a few minutes here and just delicately put some little leaves here and there and take a breather, and then I'll hop back in and talk about that blue tape, which is the best part of this project. Okay, I've got this about filled in. I'm just adding a few more little leaf touches here and there around that blue tape so that when I peel it off, it kind of makes that little shape. And I'm considering more of those brown dots, but I decided to just stop here and put my brush down and let it dry. So you want to let this dry completely before you take that tape off, or you could smear your beautiful project. Okay, now for the best part, it's taking off this tape. It is so satisfying if it goes well. Thankfully for this project, it did. I just recommend going slow, pressing your paper down, and taking it off gently so that you get that beautiful space where you can write whatever you like or leave it blank. It's totally up to you. So I grabbed a pencil and a permanent ink pen, and I'm going to use my pencil, which I think coordinates really well with my note card there actually. And I'm going to let this just dry even more before I write, in case I lay my hand down on the artwork. I don't want to go wrong and smear anything. And then I'm writing her name in all caps. I am not a great hand writer. I am not a calligrapher or anything like that. And I'm just using a pencil first, and then I decided to go over it with ink. I'm erasing this because it's a little crooked. The last few letters got a little wonky, so I'm just erasing it, blowing off the eraser, trying it again just by eye. Now you could use a ruler and make some really light marks to kind of know where to set your letters or how tall to write them. If you have great handwriting, you don't have to worry about this. I ended up hating this, absolutely hated it. I went over it with the pen carefully, and then I thought I could just add a little bit of thickness to the downstrokes and to the curves on the C and the O to kind of give it a little bit of oomph, or to kind of cover up my wonky handwriting. And as I just kept going, it just kept getting worse and worse, as you can see here. So I want to encourage you, if you don't like some part of your project, always step back, take a breath, take a beat, and think about what you can do to salvage your project. We spent a lot of time on these flowers and these berries, which I love them. They came out great. I'm not so happy with this name. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so I want it to be really pretty. I want my friend Connie to love this, and I want it to her to know how much I love her and that I did this special project for her. So always just think about what you can do differently. So I'm looking at this and I'm realizing I don't like this. I'm going to cover it up. So I'm wondering, how am I going to cover this up? And thankfully, I have figured out how to print on watercolor paper. So after I am finished trying to figure out how to salvage this, I decide to just type out her name on my word processing on my iPad, and then I printed her name on watercolor paper, which I knew would give me a couple of different options. I could paint on it, I could paint the whole thing a certain color, I could add more flowers if I wanted to. So all I really had to figure out after I printed it is what I do next with it. So here I'm still trying with this. I'm erasing my pencil marks and I'm feeling pretty deflated. I'm considering this other option with the printer paper as I'm working on this, and even though I'm still trying, it's not happening. So I've decided this is a thumbs down. I don't like it. Printed her name in all caps on watercolor paper, reused my tape from the project so that I could get the exact shape. So I just taped this back down. I actually fished this out of the trash can, and it's my artist trash can, so it's just thread and watercolor paper and that kind of stuff in there, nothing gross or anything. And I'm putting it over her name. It's actually a little bit smaller than her name, but it's okay. I'm just going to trace the edges of this. Trace lightly. I pressed a little bit too hard, and then when I went to erase it got a little wonky, but I'm just going around this so I get a good sense of where to cut. And I'm going to take the tape off so I don't have to worry about that anymore. Put it through my cutting little cutter here I have, and get as close as I can. It doesn't have to be precisely on these lines. I just want it to look pretty straight and be about this shape. So I'm cutting the top and the bottom first, and then I'll cut those angled signs, and then the next step is to just erase those marks, which, as I mentioned, if you write a little bit lighter, those marks will come off much easier. So easy to have a cutting board like this. I think they're like maybe $15 to $20 at your local hobby shop. So those are always good to have on hand. After I get this erased, I have some more decisions to make. So I kind of play around with this, and I'm going to kind of put it over the card to see if I like just the white watercolor background. Now, you don't have to print on watercolor paper. You could use cardstock, or you could use copy paper. I think watercolor probably looks the best and coordinates the most, but definitely before printing on watercolor paper, check with your printer settings and look at your manual or call a manufacturer to see if you can print on watercolor paper. So I like the white. I think it's super cool, very, very chic looking, but I decide that I want a little more color to make it pop. So I think the white would have been fine, but I want to add a little bit more blue. So I'm going to mix some light blue, and again with watercolor, it's best to go light to dark. You can't really go back from dark. Sometimes you can wash it out and dab with a paper towel, but oftentimes that gets you into massive trouble and can potentially ruin your project. So I'm just going with kind of a blue-gray here, and I'm going to go all over this little shape here with it and completely cover it. And then I'm going to just decide if I like this. I actually really like the white. When I went back to look at this video, I was like, oh gosh, the white did really look really good. But I ended up going with a darker blue here. So even this color here, this is another decision I made mid-process where I just decided that this wasn't quite what I was going for. It didn't really go with the colors in my painting as much as I wanted it to, so I'm just going straight back to that blue. I'm going dark, blending in a little bit of water with this to kind of tone it down just a little bit, but I really like that rich kind of maybe fall color, dark and moody vibe going on here with this, I suppose. And I'm going to let this dry. Now this will curl up some, and that's fine. I'm going to use a little technique here to flatten that out, which I'll show you. But I wanted to have this a little bit three-dimensional off the card and not laying flat. I have these little sticky shapes that I use. Unfortunately, all I have left are the tiny little circles, so I had to spend a lot of time picking all those little dots off. I usually use squares that are quite a bit larger than that, but I was out. So I put plenty of dots on there. They're sticky on both sides, and then I can just attach my Connie label to that. Now I'm bending this to make it a little bit straighter while it's drying, and I give that plenty of time to dry. And then once it was dried, I touched it to see if it was still wet. It's totally dry, so now I'm just pressing it onto my card. So I'd love to know if you like the blue or the white better, and I have a couple more tutorials here if you would like to check out those projects. Please subscribe if you like watercolor.